don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but that's the first bridge. See, I've got to tell you these things, and I don't think he ever told you folks much, did he? Dick was that kind of a guy. We were the first infantry division across the Remagen Bridge, which was the bridge that was captured across the Rhine River. And we were on the other side of that bridge, and the German army was there with us, and our guys were still back over on this side of the bridge. It was kind of a lonesome time. But when you had fellows like Dick up front with the rifles and the machine guns, you knew you'd be taken care of. We survived that, and he survived that. And then a month or so later, we're down crossing the Danube River. And some general gave the order that river had to be crossed in the middle of the day. And that's not a very smart time to try to cross a river when the enemy is on the other side, all lined up with his machine guns and all. Dick's company was given the job of being the initial company to cross that river. Needless to say, they didn't make it. And Dick didn't make it, because he was wounded again. And I had heard, we were close to the area at that time, and I'd heard that the 2nd Battalion was being chewed up, and so I went over to the 8th Station of the 2nd Battalion to find out what was going on. And yes, Dick Talcott had come through. How was he? He's okay. And I said, that's not good enough. Where's the battalion surgeon? And I went to the major, and I said, how about Dick Talcott? Is he going to make it? Because that was always the important thing, is your buddy going to make it? And he assured me that he was going to make it. And then a month or so later, the war was over, and it was several years before we were able to make contact. And ever since that time, as often as we could, Nixie and Barbara and Dick and I had breakfast or lunch. And while we never talked much about our experiences, we both, I'm sure, always felt that we're privileged men to have lived to be 70 or 73 as I am. I thought you kids might be interested in that. Thank you.
I learned more from Cyril that day at my dad's memorial service than I ever did from my father in 50 years. I'm glad my mom's here today. There's something I want to tell everybody. I hope you don't mind, Mom, but my mom has done something extraordinary, and what she's done is she has saved every single letter my father ever wrote her. And that doesn't just include the war, it includes high school and college. And when I asked her if she wanted to share something here at the service, she said yeah, she'd like to, and she wasn't sure exactly what, and then she found, I think, exactly the right thing. She found a letter that my father had written her on May 24th, 1945, after the Battle of the Bulge. And she asked me to read this today, and I'll read it quickly. It's a couple pages long, and it's a first-hand account of my father's service. I won't read the first page because it was a little mushy. That's understandable. He was in Europe. And I'll pick it up here on the second page. And he says, settle down on your bed because it's quite a story. We went from Camp Maxey to Camp Miles Standish, about 30 miles from Boston, and a like number from Providence. On the way, we went through Kansas City, Davenport, Rock Island, Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo. We were at Miles Standish until the 29th of September. It was quite nice there and had 2 passes to Boston. Saw the Boston Yanks play the Philadelphia Eagles in professional football once, and I didn't care for Boston too much. It didn't give me any thrill whatsoever. But on the 29th, we got on a banana boat at Boston and had a last look at the tower of the Old North Church. Had a good trip across, although I remember some days it was plenty rough. On board ship, we could buy all the candy bars we wanted. I imagine I had about 75 in the 10 days we were able to get them. Rumor had it that we were to stop at Plymouth, England for supplies and then go on to Cherbourg to debark. We stopped at Plymouth, all right, but we got off there. We got on trains and rode to Dorchester, where we set up in a camp that night on the edge of town. It was at Plymouth we had our first glimpse of war. It was pretty well posted around the harbor. We had it good for the 3 weeks we were there. When we were in Dorchester, we went into town every night almost. Spent most of our time at the Red Cross canteen and one of the many pubs. It was about the last day of October that we went to Southampton to catch a boat across the channel. The Red Cross girls gave us coffee and donuts on the docks. It took us about a day to cross the channel, arriving in Le Havre. There we really saw the effects of the war. Le Havre really took a beating. That harbor was a mess. Pillboxes 6 feet thick were blasted all over the place. Everything was in ruins. We got on tanks there and made our way up near Rouen, where we stayed 2 nights and a day before going on. From Rouen we got on trucks again and headed for Belgium, about 30 miles from Liège, they told us. Of course, it was cold as the devil, and we were jammed in these trucks with our equipment. Everybody about froze. We finally reached our destination. We bivouacked in Belgium for about 20 miles behind the lines. There we were attached to the 9th Army. We stayed there for about 5 days, received ammunition, and then took off again. In that 5 days, we saw our first buzz bombs, of which we were to see many more later. We ended up the 10th of November on the front lines, our company being attached to the 102nd Cavalry of the 5 Corps 1st Army. 5 Corps had spearheaded across France and Belgium since D-Day, and we were now inside the Dragon's Teeth, up against the Siegfried Line just outside of Landsdorf, Germany, some 20 kilometers south of Aachen. We were just holding the line then on what turned out to be an inactive front. On what was termed an inactive front. We lost a lot of men while we were there, however, from patrol action, artillery, mortars, etc. Our main enemy, however, was the weather. It was cold, rainy, and snowy. We were not equipped for that weather, not even having overshoes. About a fourth of the company was gone in 2 weeks with trench foot. There was nothing we could do about it. Standing guard in a foxhole, 2 hours on and 4 hours off, and all day, day in and day out. When we became short of men, it often meant 2 on and 2 off. In about 2 weeks, we finally all got overshoes. By then, most of our feet had been frozen. We stayed at Landsdorf until the 14th of December, when orders came through we were going to rejoin our division. Our division was located in the Ardennes Forest. On the 14th of December, that meant little to us. If only we could have seen into the future. Our battalion was on the right flank of the 2nd Division. We were attacking, taking about 7 pillboxes a day. The Ardennes Forest is thick and very hilly. It was slow, hard work. It was the 15th that Vince Spicula was killed, and the same date that I saw one of E Company's men hit directly by an 88. Of course, it blew him all over the place. I asked who it was, and they told me it was Chet Seifrotz. He and Bob Taylor and I roomed together at Tarleton. On the morning of the 17th, things started to pop. For a while, we didn't know what the score was. Then it became apparent we were in the midst of a strong counterattack. The Battle of the Bulge had started. At that time, we were in the Manchau sector, not far from Malmedy, north of St. Vith and Bastogne. Things were pretty hot. Big Tiger tanks, paratroopers in American uniforms, and Jerry in civilian clothes were all over the place. That was truly a rough ordeal. About the 19th of December found us back near E. Elsenborn, Belgium, organizing what was left of a tired bunch of soldiers. We had marched a little. We had marched a little north, and we were now right on the northern edge of the bulge. We had held our ground after giving up a little, so that that a line could be formed. A lot of this was due to the help of the 1st, 2nd, and 9th Divisions, without whose assistance we should have failed. The Air Corps was flying in weather which was when ordinarily they would never have left the ground. It was foggy for almost a week and snowing plenty. I couldn't begin to describe the suffering that went on in the Battle of the Ardennes. While we were reorganizing, we were used mostly for support and reserve. We didn't go out on our own again until after the 1st of January. In the meantime, Christmas had passed. You'd celebrated another birthday, and 1945 was here. We were all hoping it would be a victory year. We moved our line again about the 4th of January to an open hill just outside of Elsenborn. The Jerrys were in the woods about 300 yards to our front and had good observation on us. We couldn't move around during the day, but when he was plugging away at us with the machine gun, on the 22nd, we were to move back to Battalion Reserve. We were all glad because he was coming plenty close with that baby. It was my time that day, though, and he put one through my shoulder. Then I went back through. I can't read it. I can't read this. I went back and it eventually ended in Paris. There they had me on a litter as they took all my clothes. They were really filthy. I wanted to see Paris, but all I saw was the Eiffel Tower from the hospital window. Ordinarily, I would have stayed in Paris, but casualties were coming in pretty heavy, so they sent me back to England on a plane. I never did find out where it was we landed, but I ended up in a general hospital in Hereford. That was the 2nd of February. I was in the ward until the 13th when I was released to rehab. I stayed there until about the 1st of March when I went to the 10th Replacement Depot just outside of Birmingham. Got equipment there, then started back through all the replacement depots, went through Southampton, Le Havre, Soissons, Liège, Aachen, Bonn, Remagen, Bad Willingen, and finally found the outfit on the 9th of April up in the Ruhr pocket. Meanwhile, they had fought their way across the Rhone. We were one of the first across the Rhine and had ridden tanks halfway across Germany before turning back into the pocket. For the last week, we had it good in the pocket. Every day found us taking from 2 to 5 towns, usually lightly defended. We always slept in the houses, and we were getting good eats. The last few days, we took more prisoners than we could count. The 9th Panzer and the 3rd Grenadiers surrendered to our battalion the last day. They were veterans of the African campaign. After the pocket collapsed, we moved down to the 3rd Army at Bamberg. We had a few days rest until we took off again. It wasn't bad until we hit the Danube River. There, our battalion had one of the roughest goes of the whole action we saw. Jerry was waiting for us across the river with 160 of his Hitler Youth. They were well supplied with machine guns and ammunition. We still could have made it, but everything was wrong. It was about noon when we tried to cross. We had no support, no smoke screen. Only a few approaches to the river were accessible. We got 2 boats across. Several more were lost in the water. Our platoon had to cross a sandbar about 10 yards out. We got to the sandbar, but we were pinned down there by heavy small arms fire. Meanwhile, we'd lost several men, and yours truly had been clipped in the chin. We had to stay put until dark and then withdraw. It was really a rotten deal, worse than I can describe. Lieutenant Bennett, our CO, was killed there. He had 2 children, one of whom he had never seen. He was as good an officer as I had ever seen. All that happened on the 27th of April. After that, we made one more attack. From May 4th, we were all waiting for the surrender to come. it was the 4th that I went back to the evac hospital and had my chin sewed up. We were at Lance Hut then, and just north of Munich. There we were still there when the war ended. That, darling, is my history over here in brief. Of course, there's a lot I haven't told you. A lot you will never know. It's not that I wouldn't tell you, it's just that there's no way to put it into words. I found that there's nothing glorious in war. They may call this a grand and glorious triumph, but ask anybody who fought and he'll say, only that we won. I'm able to write this only because they no longer have unit censorship. Our letters are now just spot checked by the base censor. And that's pretty much the end of the letter here. My mom brought this letter with her, and the first time I'd seen it was last night. And thanks. And I learned a lot about my dad's service there. So I want to thank my mom for bringing that letter today, and hope it gives you a little bit more appreciation about just one guy in that crazy war over in Europe, and getting back to his girlfriend in 1945, and just being lucky and raising a family. Thanks.
It's one of the very special things about our services, which gentlemen like myself and Bruce get the honor to be around here for these great historical reflections. John, was there anybody else that we'd like to have a quick speech from, and we'll have a proceed. Oh, very good. Aunt Deb.
Beth.
Oh, Beth, pardon me.
And JoJo for doing this. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. Webster's dictionary defines an idol as an object of worship or someone that is an object of your devotion. Well, the object of my devotion was my big brother, Richard Carter Talcott, a.k.a. Dick. Dick was the third oldest sibling in our family of 5 children. I was the youngest. He was 13 years older when I was born. Before the age of 5, my memories are few, but somewhere in there, I remember there were times when my brother held me and held me by my ankles, and my sister or one of his friends held me by my arms, and they swung me back and forth to the tune of Popeye the Sailor Man. Then, at the very end, they would swing me up high in the air, and I would be caught by my brother Dick. Well, fortunately, he was good at catching because he played on the varsity football team at the local high school. I did not know anything about football, but I went to all of his games with my parents. I was wrapped up in blankets in a prone position on the bleachers during the games, and I only sat up if I was offered popcorn or hot chocolate. So, fast forward to the years of World War II. My husband and I know that our own children, like my daughter Amy, and our 7 grandchildren have never ever known anything about living with a universal military draft, blackouts, rationing of food and gasoline, no new toys at Christmas or birthdays, but I experienced that. My parents were very excited when Dick's college years were interrupted during the time of the draft. They were pleased because he had been accepted into a military academy. I don't remember if it was Coast Guard or Navy, but a military academy which prolonged being taken into the draft. So, it prolonged that for a while. But one day, he came home, he announced that he had signed to join the Army Infantry, as John said, because the war had escalated and he wanted to go where the action was right away. I was so proud of how handsome he looked in his uniform. But at the ages of 5 to 7, I had no idea what war was about or any idea how going overseas, how far away that was. So for many of you who have lived during the high-tech world of instant communication worldwide, it's hard for you to imagine typewriter telegrams being converted to a V-mail letter like this. This is one that my sister Lois, 3 years older than I, received from Dick when he was in the hospital in England, and it was just before Christmas. And he told us we lived in the greatest country in the world, that the children in England could not even expect anything at Christmas time. So anyway, the other thing that you in the tech world have never experienced probably is receiving a telegram delivered to your door by a uniformed telegram person. So when Dick was wounded the first time, and I was probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there, I remember that a telegram was delivered to our door. My mother signed for it, and then she went off to another room, and I could hear her crying quietly. Later, my father came home from work. They went off together in a room, and I knew it wasn't good news. Later, when my parents learned that Dick was missing in action, I learned that the telegram had said Dick was missing in action. Not where, just missing. So the same scenario happened later, another telegram, and we learned he was wounded in action. Not how badly, not anything, just wounded. So after that, Dick was able to send the V letters saying that he was in a hospital in England and kind of what was wrong with him, and that he was being treated. So this whole scenario happened a second time. 2 telegrams, then a letter from him in England. I don't recall exactly how the news of his Bronze Stars for bravery was earned, but now I know. His Battle of the Bulge experience was definitely what he had wanted to do because his desire to serve was so strong. When the war ended, my family gathered for homecoming of all the servicemen. My father picked up my brother at the train station. My oldest sister, and this was like the middle of the night that he was coming in. So my oldest sister, was married to her bomber pilot who had served in the South Pacific, she had already welcomed him home. They were married. And my next oldest sister, who had served in the waves and then married while her sailor was still in the service, had already welcomed him home. It was nighttime due to the changes in time zones here and across the ocean.